I would love to hear from you. So just say hi if you're there. Hi, everyone. This is Erin. Figuring out some technical issues here. If you can see me and hear me, say hello. Love to hear from you. Okay. Hi, Susan. Thank you. Okay, great. That's okay. I got it. I just wanted to make sure. I know a few of you had joined earlier and sent me a message. I was just waiting to be a little bit closer to 11 Eastern. So we are just about there. Hi, Kelly. Thanks for joining, everyone. I know this is very different from in the past. We've probably all been in Zoom meetings for the past 6 months. So I really appreciate you being here today. I'm just going to wait a minute. Oh, hi, David. I could see your names coming in as you chat. I think there's a little bit of a delay, so we're just going to wait a couple of more minutes. But if you want to say hi, pop it in the chat. If you want to tell me where you're from, I'd love to see that. Great. I'm glad to see that you can, I'm glad to read that you can see and hear me. So that's positive. This is a new technology for some of us. So anyway, just wait like one more minute. It's 11 o'clock here in New York. Good morning, Vicki. Thanks for joining. So this is great. I'm gonna set up my presentation, share my screen. Here we go. So, great. We have Illinois. We have Boca Raton, Florida. Okay, so right now you should be able to see my screen as well as me. Hi, James. I'm glad you made it. I got your email. So, James from Utah. Okay. Key West. Great. This is awesome. Okay. So I am going to get started. I have a lot to talk about. Hi, Cheryl from Tennessee. I have a lot to talk about today, but I just kind of wanted to introduce myself. I'm going to turn the camera off just for a second. And I want to introduce myself. I am Erin Smith. I have a website, Gluten-Free Chatter. And my topic today is live life to the fullest. I will admit that when I was approached by Nourished with this topic, I wasn't sure how I was going to handle it. But, as we'll talk about, I was actually diagnosed with celiac as a kid. So I realized my whole life has been living with celiac and trying to live my life to the fullest. So that's what I'm going to cover today. I'm going to start with some housekeeping. And basically, there is a chat, as many of you are seeing. Hi, Jennifer and Michelle. So you can use the chat window. There is a little bit of a delay, so keep that in mind. If you have any questions, type it in there. I'm going to take some pauses throughout to address your questions, but just keep in mind it may not be immediately. Also, your chat is only visible to me. So if you had a question for someone specific or you want to connect with someone afterwards, I'm happy to make that connection. I have some PDFs and I'll show you how to access those. I have PDF files for you to download, and I will refer to them during this presentation, so I'll show you how to get those. And then also I have a few slots after this presentation for a one-on-one chat. I can schedule a few more, but basically this is a one-on-one video chat. And if you can't find a slot, I'm happy to talk to you over the phone. And I love connecting with people. I had a great one-on-one chat yesterday with a woman down at Atlanta, and we basically just talked about travel for an hour. You can always email me. And one thing I would like to say is that I am not a doctor. I am just someone that's been living with celiac disease for a very long time. So please keep that in mind. If you have any questions or you want to, get some more medical information, I really encourage you to speak with your physician. So really quick before we dive in, this is my blogger booth. So you came to me through the speaker portal this morning or through the speaker list. But if you go under blogs and influencers, you can find Gluten-Free Globetrotter, and my downloads are here. And there is a kitchen essentials. There is an article I wrote for Allergic Living magazine on Guide to Travel. I know travel in Europe. I know that's not really allowed right now. And then there's my media kit, which is just how you can contact me. I also want to mention that I am hosting a huge giveaway. The Nourish Festival brands have been extremely generous. So if you sign up for my newsletter today, or if you just email me, you'll be entered to win. And I will be picking a winner on September 30th. And let me tell you, I cannot eat all of this food myself, so I really hope you enter. So I'll put my camera back on here for a minute for those of you that I haven't seen yet, and introduce myself again. So I am Erin Smith. I write the Gluten-Free Globetrotter, and I was diagnosed with celiac disease in 1981. So here's a picture of me, little old me back in 1981. And this is right around the time of diagnosis. So I started exhibiting symptoms in the winter of 1980. And then by July 81, I had been diagnosed. So of course, I don't remember life before my diagnosis because I was so young. But I like to show this picture so you can kind of see like the before and the after, see where I am today. I know a lot of people are often shocked that I've been diagnosed for so long. So that's why I like to show this picture just to kind of put it in perspective. I've been involved with the New York City Celiac Meetup Group since 2005. I should mention that I live in Brooklyn, New York right now. So if you hear any background noise, it's just the street noise. I started my first website, Gluten-Free Fun, in 2007, and my second website, Gluten-Free Globetrotter, in 2011. I will say that I haven't blogged on Gluten-Free Fun for a long time, but I do maintain my social media, and Gluten-Free Globetrotter is my active blog now. I moved to California in 2016, and I started the Santa Cruz Celiac group. It is still live on Facebook, but as with New York Celiac and Santa Cruz Celiac, there are no in-person events right now, which is why you're all here. And then I started a celiac travel group on Facebook a few years ago, and I'll show you that shortly. But that group I started really to share my travel experiences, but also to hear what other people were saying. Right now, we are obviously not traveling. If we live in the US, we're doing more local travel, but there are a lot of people from around the world. I will also say we are a heavily moderated group. So we have moderators in New York, Chicago, Toronto, and Australia. So I'd like to really be diverse in our moderation because there are different rules and regulations around the globe. But I encourage you to join that group. And then I know somebody asked a few questions ago how many continents I've been to. Well, I've been to 37 states, 23 countries, 3 continents, and 100% gluten-free all of the time because I was diagnosed so young. I don't actually know how to travel while eating gluten. So I am going to dive right in and let's see. Okay, so basically how I'm gonna kind of give this presentation is my personal experience, but also I recognize like the curve of celiac diagnosis to learning to living. So I encourage you to post questions along the way. I'm gonna cover a lot of information, but I'm also going to give some Q&A time at the end. And again, you could always email me or send me a message through social media, and hopefully I can answer your questions. So let me turn my camera off for a minute. I want to talk about celiac disease, and I put morning, whoops, there goes my mouse. The morning after, I call it, and I put it in quotes because I do feel like there is this mourning period. And when I put this out to my readers a couple of weeks ago, I heard a lot of things like, I will never travel again. I can never eat anything again. I'm going to miss bread and pizza and my life is over. I've also heard I can't drink beer. I'll never go out to eat again. No more parties for me. So what I'm hoping today is that we can kind of address some of these feelings of mourning, these feelings of sadness, and really focus on the can. So I love this quote. I put this up here, and it says, don't focus on what you can't do, focus on what you can do. And really, to be honest, that's how I've been living my whole life. I don't know how to live any other way, but I also couldn't imagine going through the past 30 plus years of my life thinking, oh, I can't do this. And really, I'm hoping today I can give you some encouragement of what you can do living with celiac disease, because that's what I had to do. So this is kind of a fun little graphic, kind of the topics I plan on covering, very high level, but I'm happy to dig deeper. Again, if you have questions, feel free to jump in there. But kind of my hierarchy, or my timeline of celiac, getting diagnosed in 81, changes for my family, going to school, going to college, learning to travel. So I'm going to cover a lot of information, but hopefully give you some tips along the way. So, like I said, I was diagnosed in 1981. My symptoms were very textbook failure to thrive, which is the common symptom in children. I wasn't growing, I was malnourished, I had, tremendous GI issues, and so I was actually diagnosed by a resident gastroenterologist who was younger than my parents at the time. So I know this was a very unusual diagnosis, because today, in the 2020s, it takes an average of 6 to 10 years to get a proper diagnosis. Way back in 1981, I was diagnosed in less than a year. So I feel very lucky, and I understand it's not common, but I want you to know that if you are not getting a diagnosis right away, you are not alone, sadly. But it's also because there's more than 300 known symptoms of celiac disease. Now, for me, it was gastrointestinal, it was nourishment, it was failure to thrive. For you, it could be something completely unrelated, or you could even be asymptomatic, where you might have had low iron and presenting anemia, but it could be celiac. So I would like to kind of prepare you for, visiting your doctor. And I say familiarize yourself with these symptoms, but also don't diagnose yourself. Make sure that you get a proper diagnosis, but also, you can use this beyondceliac.org list to bring, awareness to yourself about your symptoms, but also to mention it to your doctor. Now, in 1981, I was diagnosed via endoscopy and biopsy. When I was diagnosed, there was no blood test, there were no genetic tests. But today, even in 2020, the gold standard for diagnosing celiac disease is an endoscopy with a biopsy. And there's a lot of information on the Mayo Clinic website, but this is really what all of the top celiac doctors in the country will tell you, is that endoscopy with the biopsy to show the atrophy of your villi is the gold standard. Today, there are genetic tests, HLA-DQ2 and HLA-DQ8. I personally have never been genetically tested for celiac disease, but I'm pretty sure it's genetic because my sister has it. I have a first cousin that has it, and I suspect there's other family members that do have it. I do have a son who we have not gotten genetically tested yet for celiac, but we did discuss this with our doctor, and at this point in his life, we felt we didn't need to do any more testing. He had a lot of tests after his birth, so wanted to kind of give him a break. There is a blood test for antibodies, but I will tell you, you have to be on gluten at the time of testing. So some doctors, and I know this is the case for doctors in New York City at the Celiac Center, they will require you to be consuming gluten if you're getting the blood test, or even the endoscopy. And I don't quote me on that, but I do know that some doctors require you to be consuming gluten at the time of testing. So for me, someone that's been celiac and gluten-free for so many years, I would actually not show any results on the TTG or IgA tests. And I just started seeing a new primary care physician, and he actually even said that to me, which made me so happy. He knew what celiac was, but also said it would be really pointless to do the testing unless I was exhibiting any symptoms. The other thing that is come to light in recent years, probably the past 10 or 15 years, is that there really is a higher chance of celiac in first-degree relatives. So I know Chicago does first-degree relative testing. So I would recommend, if you do have celiac, that you also get your first-degree relatives testing if they are open to it. So I'm going to pause here for a minute. Hi, Allie and Scott. We are going to talk about college, so give me a few minutes and we'll get to that. So thank you. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the celiac learning curve. Now, I will remind you, just going to come back on here for a minute. I was diagnosed with celiac before the internet. So I would like to tell you that if you are diagnosed today, you are quite lucky, in the sense that you have a lot more information than my family did. We didn't have this information when I was a kid. We didn't have cell phones when I was a kid. So it's a very different time to be diagnosed. But I want to say that no matter when you're diagnosed, there is a very, very steep learning curve. You need to learn how to shop. You need to learn how to read ingredients. You need to learn how to cook again. So one thing I will say, and this kind of, if you were in the beginning, there is this mourning period. There is this very emotional connection to food, and I recognize that. I think you just need to pause and take a deep breath and know that you have a lot of resources at your fingertips now. When I was a kid, we used to write down the phone numbers at the supermarket, come home and call the brands. It's probably the only 12-year-old in 1990 calling Kellogg's on a regular basis. But that's what I had to do because I needed to know what was in my food. Now, this was also before the top 8 allergens were designated by the FDA. This is before any gluten-free labeling. So, keep in mind it was a different time, but it was a steep learning curve for everyone. And it's a steep learning curve for you now. And I totally recognize that. I think what you need to do after your diagnosis is do some research. Familiarize yourself with brands that will be gluten-free friendly, celiac safe, talk to a registered dietitian. I know too many people that were given a diagnosis and say, here you go, eat gluten-free. And then you just stare blankly at the doctor like, what does that mean? And that's pretty much what my mom did back in 81. It was like, I don't even know what gluten is. And many of you might not know what gluten is. But, I think there's a ton of resources. You're at this Nourish Festival. There's hundreds of brands on this platform right now that are gluten-free friendly, celiac friendly, allergen friendly. Just get familiar with these brands and then give them your business, Also, there are some major supermarket chains that do gluten-free shopping tours. So this is something you might want to look into. They may be suspended at the moment due to coronavirus, but this is where they might have an in-house dietitian that gives you a list of the products, shows you how to read ingredients, shows you which sections of the supermarket have the products you need. So there are a lot of resources out there, and I just want to encourage you to use those resources. The other thing I'll talk about, which is something that wasn't even on my radar as a kid, was celiac proofing your kitchen. So this is a personal choice, I believe. If you want to make your entire kitchen, your entire home gluten-free, that's up to you. But when I was a kid, nobody even suggested that to us. Nobody suggested separate condiments. Nobody suggested a separate toaster because there wasn't enough information. I don't think I learned the words cross-contamination until I was in my 20s. So keep in mind that, my mom did the best that she could for many, many years, but we didn't know what we know now. So some resources I would suggest are downloading my Gluten-Free Kitchen Essentials. I actually put that together for people that are using a shared kitchen at an Airbnb or a vacation rental, but there's a lot of tips on there of things that you could use in your kitchen to keep yourself a little safer. I also found a great article written by a registered dietitian. It's on the Today's Dietitian website, and it's called Gluten-Free Kitchen Essentials. So you can just Google that title, look for Today's Dietitian. It's a very comprehensive list of things you can look for in look for to prepare your kitchen to be gluten-free. I know some families with shared kitchens keep a separate pantry, keep a separate set of silverware, but this article really goes through the level of detail you might want if you want to either have a shared kitchen or have a dedicated gluten-free kitchen. There was also a presentation yesterday, and it was by Vanessa Weisbrod, who might be on this call now. But it was a research study put together, and it talks about, contamination in the kitchen, toaster ovens. So all of the presentations are being recorded. So I encourage you to go back and watch that from yesterday, because there's a lot of good science-based information. The other thing, which I had to learn, my mom had to learn, you have to learn if you're diagnosed today, is how to cook and bake gluten-free. It's not exactly the same, and I say that from a baking perspective. Gluten is what binds your baked goods together, but there are so many wonderful recipe bloggers out there. I am not one of them. I do not write recipes. I just go to my friends and look at their websites, but there's so much information out there. So without a doubt, if there's a favorite recipe that you have that you would like to recreate, somebody out there made a recipe for it. And then also in the 80s, and like any kids today, I know Allie jumped on and she has a son with celiac. Learning how to be a gluten-free kid in the gluten-free world is not easy, whether it's in the 80s, the 90s, 2010. It's difficult, and I recognize that. But I'm going to talk in the next slide a little bit about that. And I'm going to take a pause here for a minute to read some of your questions. Right, so somebody suggested online shopping. That's a great tool that I did not obviously have in the 1980s. A lot of websites now will let you search specifically for gluten-free products or additional allergens. You can tick off what your allergens are and shop that way. And then another question, which is a really great point, gluten-free and gluten-friendly are different things. Yes, 100%. I would also beg to, restaurants that gluten-free and celiac friendly are very different. Just because a restaurant has a gluten-free menu doesn't mean there are sorry, another question just popped up. Just because a restaurant has a gluten-free menu does not mean it's celiac safe. And we can talk about that a little bit more. Also, there is talk about labeling, and I really encourage you to familiarize yourself with gluten-free certifications in this country, the FDA recommendations. I will say it is not an FDA, law, so to say, but just make sure you familiarize yourself. I will say in the United States, you have to have the top 8 allergens listed, and wheat is one of those top 8 allergens. Susan's asking me who wrote the article. Susan, if you shoot me an email, I can find it for you. I don't have it at my fingertips right now. And then someone else is asking if it is safe to be gluten-free if you don't have an allergy. So to answer that, I would say there's really no reason to be gluten-free if you don't require it medically. There's no evidence that gluten-free will help you lose weight but I would say if you choose to go gluten-free, it's very different than being medically required to go gluten-free. So me personally, I'm medically required to be gluten-free, so I can't really speak to being gluten-free by choice. Okay, so I'm gonna move on to the next slide here. And I'm going to turn my camera off. Okay, so teen years. And here is where I recognize that being a teenager is awkward. Going through school is awkward, and being celiac is even more awkward because you are the only one sometimes with celiac and being gluten-free. I want to give a shout out to the Generation Gluten-Free support groups. These are targeted specifically to young adults and kids that have celiac or that are gluten-free. I know my friends on here, they run the New Jersey group, the North New Jersey group, but Generation Gluten-Free is a resource I wish I had when I was a kid. I actually did not meet another kid with celiac until I was about 14, maybe 13 or 14. Prior to that, I was going to support groups with my mom on Long Island in New York. Everyone was over the age of 50, and I felt like I had an old person's disease. So to know that something like Generation Gluten-Free exists now really gives me so much hope for these kids that they will not feel alone. And then something else that did not exist, and really I am going to admit that I don't know much about a 504 plan. I know some people on here are quite familiar with a 504 plan, but a 504 plan is basically a plan you can put together for your child to protect them in school and protect them, you know, in terms of giving them access to the bathroom, giving them, you know, making sure that, you know, they're not discriminated against because of celiac disease. So again, I encourage you to Google 504 plan. There's many parents out there that have put together these plans for their children. I am not there yet, but I could be one day. And that's one thing that wasn't even, again, on our radar when I was a child in school. And, you know, it's just something, it's just an extra tool to have in your kit when you are putting your child into school. And again, kind of circling back to the topic here, living life at the fullest, what I'm trying to really emphasize here are all of the things that I have done and that you can do with celiac disease, you know, and this is kind of where I'm going into like the more specifics of activities, but attending sleepaway camp, going to birthday parties, going to sweet 16s, going to college parties, being away from my parents for the first time. I did all of this with celiac disease in the 90s. And was I 100% safe all the time? No, I'm not going to lie to you. I definitely got gluten many times in my life. But I also learned how to be my best advocate. And I think that's one thing that I would love for you to take away, no matter what age and what time you got diagnosed, or, you know, whether it was 5 years ago or it was 5 minutes ago. You really have to learn to be your own advocate, because nobody else is going to advocate for you unless you're a parent or a loved one or somebody that's really supportive. But you need to embrace it. And I did it, and I will be the first to admit it took me until my 20s to really be the advocate I am today, because I was embarrassed, and I recognize that it's embarrassing, and you don't want to be the odd person out, and you don't want to be the difficult eater. I get it. I totally get it. But I think, you know, educating yourself and really learning how to speak up will make your life so much better, and really help you feel empowered to make these decisions. I will say one thing I really give my parents credit for is not treating me as the other because I had celiac disease. You know, I went to sleepaway camp, which was hard. And I was the only one in the whole entire camp that had any kind of food intolerances. But I managed, and I went to camp for 7 summers. I slept there for 9 weeks, and I loved it. It was such a part of my youth that I'm so glad I experienced. One thing I'm quite jealous of is that there are gluten-free camps today. Camp Celiac, Camp Gluten Freedom, and one of my favorite names, Camp We Can Eat It. So if you are a parent and you are worried about sending your kids to camp, you know, look into one of these camps that specialize in gluten-free. I will say I volunteered at Camp Celiac twice while I was living in California. They're based in Livermore. And I just had this this sense of like both jealousy and joy seeing these kids, because it was camp. It was just camp, period. Everything happened to be gluten-free. There was a celiac doctor on staff, but it was just camp and kids were just living their lives. And it was so amazing to see. And I really wish I had that as a kid. So I really encourage you to look into that if you are a parent of a child with celiac, or volunteer like I did, volunteer at the camp. One thing I started doing as a teenager was traveling internationally, and I'll talk a little bit about that. My whole conversation could be about travel because that's my passion, but I'm going to give you some tips. And then somebody did mention earlier about going to college. I'm going to give a plug to my friend over at Baltimore Gluten-Free. Andrea put together an amazing resource about college. And again, for me, this wasn't really on my radar when I was looking for colleges. But now, there are colleges that have gluten-free kitchens, that have meal plans. I will say it's obviously different now with the pandemic. Not so many kids are on campus, but I recommend this resource to you if you are starting to look for colleges for your children. Okay, so let's talk about adulting, which is maybe where a lot of you are today. So when I graduated college, it was kind of the timing of the internet becoming popular, and it wasn't AOL or AIM anymore. It was the actual internet. Google came about. It was a game changer for me because all of a sudden I could connect with people from around the world that knew what I was dealing with. I also found that there were a lot of international references that were so helpful to me as someone that was traveling. So, one thing I will say, caveat, is that not everyone online is an expert, myself included, but, there's so much information out there, and you can do your research, you can cross-check your references. Really, the internet opened up a whole new world for me as someone with celiac. I also started working in the 2000s, and this is something I hear a lot from my readers, is like, you don't want to be that difficult coworker, dealing with other coworkers, dealing with bringing your lunch every day, having business lunches, going to work conferences. And this was really something that, even though I had been gluten-free for so long, that like when I finally started working in Manhattan, I needed to learn how to navigate. One good thing is that most of the time people didn't want to eat my food, so it was safe in the company refrigerator. But dealing with coworkers is a really big issue, and I recognize that. I've been at conferences within the last 5 years where I could not eat one thing. I know some of you were following along. I was at a conference in Orlando at the hotel in the airport, and they gave me collard greens for lunch. That is not a lunch. I was quite upset, but I also had my backup food in my hotel room, luckily. So I went back and ate that. While all of my coworkers were sitting there eating from the buffet, and the only safe food they could give me was collard greens. So I recognize it's not easy. One thing I will say is that some conferences are getting better, and they're actually asking you when you register if you require a special diet or if you have any allergies. I don't think we're quite there yet where everyone's going to be accommodated, but there's definitely improvement. The other thing I will say is really it depends where you work. I ended up working for a company that was based in Portland, Oregon. Portland is a very gluten-free friendly city. So every time we had a work meal, they always would ask me what I wanted to eat, and then they could get it. It was fully catered, gluten-free. So they were able to accommodate me, and it was really helpful. I am just seeing a very unfortunate comment from James that says he was fired from a job because he requested special food. I will say, James, that's probably illegal because celiac could be considered a disability. I don't have the, legal information behind that, but it's unfortunate. It happens. Of course, there have been situations where people didn't want to dine out with me, or that I was not included in a business lunch because I was the person asking for that special food. But, this is again where I really want to empower you to speak up and to tell people that this is serious. This isn't a choice for many of us. This is a necessity. And and you wouldn't be shoving sugar down the throat of a diabetic. This is serious, and people need to understand that. So thanks for sharing that, James. Also as an adult living in New York for the first time, traveling with celiac, socializing. And I really want to emphasize again, support groups and social groups are not just for kids. Adults need this support too. So I encourage you to find a support group, the meetup group. And so I run the meetup group, or I did run the meetup group for many years by myself. But the New York City Celiac Meetup Group is a social group. We're clearly not, meeting in person right now, and I'm sure most of these groups are not. But when I started working in Manhattan, I said there have to be other people that eat like me, that want to socialize like me, that want to go to happy hour but can't drink regular beer. And I really embrace this group, which is why I became the organizer. But socializing with celiac is so important to me, and I know I've met many of you through some of these groups, and it's just so comforting to find your people, so to say. So I really encourage you to look for a local group, and if you can't find a local group, look on Facebook. I will say be careful with Facebook groups, but find that community, because we are out there. We are in every country of the world now. And, it's so comforting to talk to someone else about living with celiac disease or living with a gluten intolerance. Just kind of like this camaraderie that you might not have with anyone else. I've actually had people show up at my meetup events crying because they were so relieved to meet someone else. And I get it. I have been the only celiac in many places, and I didn't know anyone until I was a teenager. So I was really isolating, and I recognize that. So I really encourage you to find these groups. Meetup.com is a resource. Gluten.org has chapters. The National Celiac Association has events up in Massachusetts area. So look for these groups. Again, the internet is your friend, and it's one thing I was lacking as a kid. And then traveling. We're gonna, as you know, I'm Gluten-Free Globetrotter. I can talk ad nauseum about travel, but I'm gonna give you some tips. Maybe the next slide. Let me see. Hold on, transition here. Sorry, a little technical. Okay. So this is where I'm going to talk a little bit more about recent times for me and adulting with celiac, so to say, and building a family. One thing that I recognize is really difficult is building relationships when you have celiac disease. Whether it's with a loved one, or it's just dating, or it's with your family. And actually, this is one message I got a lot before this presentation is how do I deal with my family? I'm going to be honest with you. Family can be some of the worst people. And I say this from experience, is that family is the person that may, let me rephrase this. Let's see. Family could be the most difficult because family is who knows you best. So, going to a Thanksgiving dinner, going to a religious event, going to a birthday party. For some reason, family is often you're that person. When did you become that person? I had an uncle who used to give me a lot of grief about being that person. And then my cousin, his daughter, got diagnosed with celiac. So once his daughter got diagnosed, he got it. It didn't matter that he knew me 25 years living with celiac disease, but it hit close to home. So I think, family is hard, and people in your family don't want to accommodate you. I say they're your family. You don't choose your family, you choose your friends. But I will also say the people that could be the most supportive are also your family. I think one thing to keep in mind is that dating is difficult. I know I dated in New York City for a long time. But I truly believe that the person that is makes it easy to talk about celiac and living gluten-free will be the right one for you. A little personal note is when I went on my first date with my husband, I told him I was gluten-free and celiac because, to be honest, I had been on so many dates where I didn't disclose it. I was like, I'm just going to tell this dude. So I said, I have celiac. I can't eat gluten. He said, okay. I said, do you know what that means? He said, yes. And I was like, okay, I'm going to choose the restaurant. He said, fine. Turns out later, once we got to know each other better, he did not have a clue what that meant. But today, more than 7 years later, my husband is one of my best advocates. He's also speaks 4 languages, so he's my personal translator. But I truly believe that the person that, whether it's your partner or your family, the person that makes it easy to talk about living with this is the person, that will become your person, so to say. I know that's kind of redundant, but oh, thank you. Somebody said, I've never met anyone else with celiac. Well, I will tell you, I think there's 400 plus people on here right now with celiac. So you are not alone, Kelly, for sure. You are not alone. Also, I'm gonna, kind of switch this, and this is really, really resonates today because this was supposed to be an in-person expo. I don't know if you guys know that, but I attended in New Jersey last year. I met many of you there in person. The Nourish Festival was in person, and it totally flipped on its head because of COVID. So, I think one thing that I did, and I know the Jen Cafferty who runs this conference did, is making lemons into lemonade. And that, obviously lemons are gluten-free, so that's kind of a joke here. But really pivoting and saying, hey, I have this thing, or there is this coronavirus, what can I do? And so for me personally, I left corporate America. I was working in education software, and I started my own consulting business, working with gluten-free restaurants, working with gluten-free brands, consulting, social media, events, and really taking my personal knowledge, my professional experience, and turning it into a business. I will tell you, some of the best brands out there today are because of a necessity. Many of you may know GF Jules Gluten-Free. She made gluten-free baking mixes because she loved to bake, and she had celiac. And so, she put these out there, and she made these mixes for all of you. There's another local based in Connecticut. There's Izzy Bees. They are allergen-free because Izzy, who is Pam's daughter, she had food allergies. A good friend of mine, Pedro from Everybody Eats here in Brooklyn, he has celiac disease, and he wanted bread, and he wanted cookies, he wanted muffins. So really what I have seen are like really, really passionate people that don't want to be deprived have started these businesses. So maybe you have a business idea, maybe you want to open a restaurant or a bakery. I say embrace it. I will never open a bakery because I don't bake, but I just think that some of the best brands really came from people not wanting to feel deprived with celiac disease. So other things I really started doing in the 2010s, traveling internationally. I've been to Thailand, I've been to Singapore, I've been all over Europe. I really have embraced the internet as my friend for these. I've also embraced the support groups. Some of you I might have met. I went to Paris twice in the past 5 years, and both times I attended gluten-free events in Paris, and just it was amazing to me to connect with someone in a foreign country that was living the same way I did. Another amazing experience I had was I connected with the Singapore celiacs before going to Singapore for a business trip. And then Karen, who runs the group, who's an amazing hostess, she invited me to her home, and we ended up making dumplings in Singapore, and we're all gluten-free. And it was just like one of the most wonderful experiences of my life. And then yesterday I spoke with a woman who went to Uganda, and she had connected with people in Uganda ahead of time. She learned what the ingredients were in traditional Ugandan food, and she was able to have this wonderful local experience with celiac disease. And that's one thing that, if you read my blog or you know me in person, I am like pushing everyone to travel. I know it's not easy. I know it's nerve-wracking, but it's totally possible. And I really encourage you to do it when you're allowed to, and visit my website because there's a ton of resources there. So I drove cross country twice, and I also started a family. So this is one thing I want to talk about really briefly, but again, I want you to discuss this with your doctor. There is a misconception about celiac and fertility or infertility. Personally, I was told I was too old, I had too many autoimmune diseases, and I would need to see a reproductive endocrinologist. That did not happen. I got pregnant on my own. I had a baby. My son is going to be 18 months next week, actually this week. And so I really want you to talk to your doctor about that. But sorry, just shook everything. It is untreated, undiagnosed celiac disease that you need to be most worried about. I'm gonna pop really quick over to travel, and just so you know, all of these presentations are being recorded, so you can look at this. I realize that we are running out of time and there's a ton of questions coming in, so this is kind of like my top travel tips. And one plug I would like to give is for New York City. We are hurting and restaurants are closing, as they are across the entire country and the entire world. The pandemic has been especially hard on small businesses. I recently put together my Gluten-Free in New York City pandemic edition. So if you go to my website, you can look at this list. I've made a map, and I really encourage you to travel when you can, when it's safe. But also, if you can't travel at the moment, please support your local businesses. They are struggling before the pandemic. They're struggling even more now. So I can, again, give a 10-hour presentation about travel. One thing I will say is that I'm happy to have a Instagram Live, Facebook Live. I've done some of these about travel before. So if you have any interest, just shoot me an email and we can put something together specific about travel or staycations. Oh, hi, Elizabeth. She says that list is important. So thank you. But really, travel is my wheelhouse and I can talk about it forever. So these are kind of my top tips, and wanted to take a little travel break. I know we're all itching to travel again, but one day we will safely. So let's see. Somebody did ask about flying. I will say, I haven't flown, obviously, in the past 7 months, but with flying, bringing food is 100% necessary. On my website, I do have an example of a doctor's note, which I have used when I've been traveling internationally. I used it when I went to Singapore because I had so much food because I was traveling for almost 24 hours. So, basically it's a doctor's note that says this is medically required. And again, you can go to my website and download that doctor's note, but I never fly without food. I also pretty much never go anywhere without food. There's always something in my bag. So, okay, so I'm gonna just touch on this lightly. And 2020, let's admit, it has not been an easy year for anybody. We're living in really crazy times right now with COVID. I would like to give a shout out for a webinar I attended the other day, and it was about COVID and celiac. And I think we're still so new into learning about COVID, but there's a lot of research kind of going on right now through the medical school at Harvard and the National Celiac Association. So if you go to the National Celiac Association, I do believe they have a link to this webinar. I found it fascinating that, it was kind of talking about celiac, compromised immunity, COVID, and just 100% all of the doctors on the call said wear a mask. As someone living in New York City, I urge you to wear a mask if you can. But I really encourage you all to go listen to this webinar. It was very interesting and had a lot of information. I do think we'll get more research as time goes on, especially if a vaccine is created. But, pay attention to this. There was also talk in recent webinars about finding gluten-free food in a very panicky world. And as some of you may know, it was hard to find gluten-free food. It may still be hard to find it now, but I know for me personally, gluten-free was the last thing left on the shelf, but then all of a sudden gluten-free was gone too. So, being able to kind of stockpile some food, being able to have a backup just in case. Also keep in mind the foods that are naturally gluten-free. And again, this is something we talk about with a dietitian. You can find checklists online, although there's some gluten-free preppers out there. But, making sure that you have the food you need, because this is your medicine. Food is your medicine when you have celiac disease. So just like you would stock up on getting your prescriptions from the pharmacy, you need to be sure that you have food for yourself during these crazy times. Anecdotally, when I put it out there about like life during a pandemic with celiac disease, and this is why there's a little asterisk, I've heard more time at home equals less glutening. I think it's probably true because it's less people dining out, less people socializing. Does that mean you should stay home forever? No, that is not how I live my life. I go out to eat, I order takeout, but it's very interesting. And I wonder if there'll ever be a study of people maybe having less glutening, less anaphylaxis, less any kind of allergic reaction. And gluten for me is not an allergy, it's autoimmune. Just want to add that. But it's been interesting to see these comments pop up in my inbox, like, hey, I haven't been gluten in 7 months. This is the best I felt since January. And yeah, I mean, it's true, it's happening. And then, where are we today? What's next? There's a lot of research going on. There are a lot of clinical trials out there now for medications, enzymes, vaccines, both for celiac and COVID. It'll be very interesting. I mean, celiac has come a long way in 10 years. Celiac has come a long way since 1981 when I was diagnosed. There's just so much information out there. And I feel like now things are happening a lot more quickly because we really are this global community now. We can share resources, but I don't know what the future holds for celiac disease. I know many of you are looking for a cure. For me, I've been asked many times, would I take a pill? Would I get a vaccine? Right now, I don't know. There's not enough information for me. I think it's a personal decision, but it'll be very interesting to see life over the next 10 years and kind of the future of celiac. So, okay. Thank you so much for those of you who are still here. We have about 10 minutes left, and I see a bunch of questions have come in. So I just wanted to leave this on the screen so you know how to get in touch with me. I'm going to take a quick sip of water. But if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. Again, don't forget, if you're still here, sign up for my newsletter and you will be entered to win a Nourished Festival package. I'm telling you, there's like so many delicious things in this world. Okay, let me get to some of these questions. So thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. I know Saturday morning is time to get a lot of errands done. Okay, so I have a friend with a potato and egg allergy. It makes me feel not so deprived. To be honest, my son was diagnosed with a peanut allergy, and I just my heart broke for him because it's like, it's this whole new world to explore someone else's allergy. But thanks, Allie. Sorry, I'm going to go back to this for a second. But one thing I will say is that I also feel very deeply for those who have either celiac and corn, or celiac and egg, and it's difficult, but it's manageable, and I hope that your friends can navigate that. Okay, let's see. Somebody asked specifically about Disneyland. I will tell you, I have not been to Disneyland in 30 years. So there are so many resources about being celiac and going to Disney. So I encourage you to look those resources up. I don't know the rules about bringing your own food into Disney, but please Walt Disney World gluten-free, and there's just a ton of resources. Thank you, Michelle and Elizabeth and Allie. Wow. Okay. Sorry to say that the contest is not open to Canada. It's to the US only. But one day I will have an international contest, and hopefully you guys can reach out then. Okay. Going out to eat. Yes, I do go out to eat. Not so much right now because in New York City it's outdoor dining only until this week, where it's 25% indoor. But I always start my kind of investigation before I go out to eat. I do a lot of research online. Sorry, Michelle, I'll send you something. Email me. I do research online. I do use tools like the Find Me Gluten-Free app. What I will say is that I do a lot of cross-referencing. I like to check the reviews on Yelp. I like to check the reviews on Find Me Gluten-Free. I like to reach out to people that live in those cities and ask for recommendations. But I always start ahead of time. And okay, sorry everyone. This is like flying in here now all of a sudden. But for going out to eat specifically, I ask a lot of questions. I ask if there's a shared fryer. I ask if there is I'm going to share, somebody was asking me about, sorry, this is where it gets confusing because there's only one person here to navigate, and that's me. Okay, let me just put the screen up so you guys can see this while I'm talking. Okay, for those of you who asked how to sign up for my newsletter, if you go to my blog page on the Nourish Festival website, Gluten-Free Globetrotter, there is this newsletter section right here. You can sign up there. So back to going out to eat. I ask a lot of questions, and somebody said this yesterday, and I thought it was so appropriate. If the person's like, well, yeah, I think so, that's a red flag to me. If you can't get a straightforward answer, or you have a chef that can give you a straightforward answer, I personally don't take that as comforting. I take that as a red flag. So ask a lot of questions, and really speak up. I will also say I've noticed menus now saying gluten-free friendly and not, and then a disclaimer that if you have celiac, it's not safe. I am very wary of those restaurants because it makes me feel like there's probably a high risk of cross-contamination in the kitchen at that restaurant. So I would be really careful, but I would say, to answer your question, kind of do your research ahead of time, and then ask questions when you're there. And don't necessarily ask your waiter, ask the manager, or ask to speak to the chef directly. Those of you asking to sign up for the newsletter, hopefully you can find it. If not, you can just go to my website, glutenfreeglobetrotter.com, and you can sign up there. Lots of pro-Disney friends here. Ingrid and Gina, all saying that Disney is awesome, and a few people saying you could bring your food with no problem. So again, I haven't been to Disney since I was a child, so I don't know. I don't really remember. I don't remember Disney, to be honest. I was 11 or 12. Okay, so let's see. A gluten-free travel course. That's a great idea. I will look into that. And, I recognize we're not traveling, but now is probably the best time to start learning because you can plan for next year. So cruises. I'm going to give a plug to my friend Maureen, who is celiaccruise.com. Unfortunately, the 2020 cruises had to be canceled for obvious reasons, but celiaccruise.com is a cruise that has a dedicated galley for celiac people. Maureen has done a tremendous job training people at the cruise, and so I have been on Norwegian only once, and they did a great job. You definitely, before going to a cruise or a resort or anything, tell people ahead of time. contact them ahead of time, email food and beverage, and talk to them and see what the options are. So, Susan, there are also websites dedicated to cruising with celiac, so I highly recommend that. But I also recommend signing up for the celiaccruise.com newsletter, because they are planning cruises, hopefully for 2021, and one of these days I hope to go on that cruise. There's nothing better than going on a vacation where you don't have to worry about food. Am I right? Okay, so, yeah, researching to go out to eat, traveling, it takes a lot of time. Is there an easier way to do it? You know, what I do is I make it part of my itinerary planning. I will map out, make a Google map for restaurants in the area. I will, see what the local cuisine might be if I'm going to a foreign country. But I try to get familiar, just as I would get familiar with a new city to go and, explore. Rome, for example. Side note, Italy is fantastic for gluten-free, and I could talk about that forever. But, to make the research easier, I would just say make it part of your planning. Make it part of your research planning for traveling, and do as much of it before you leave home than when you're on the road, because it's when you're traveling you want to enjoy yourself. If you can do the grunt work ahead of time, it's really helpful. Okay, Disney, another Disney. You guys are Disney fans out there. Disney will give you a refrigerator. You can bring your own food into the park. Disney cruises are great. I've heard that. I know there is a Disney resort in Hawaii. Somebody mentioned that earlier. Some people say Disney is the only place they feel safe, and I know that's a person with allergies. So I guess shout out to Disney. Again, I am not personally experienced with Disney, but let's see. Okay, I think we're done with questions. So I just want to thank you all. This was a little bit nerve-wracking for me because I can't see you, but I'm so appreciative that you've all been here. Thank you for listening to my story. Please reach out anytime. gfglobetrotter@gmail.com or Gluten-Free Globetrotter on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. I see so many familiar names on here, which is just fantastic, and really appreciate you being here. And I hope that I've answered some of your questions. And if you have any other questions or you just want to meet someone with celiac disease, please feel free to reach out, and I will connect with you, or I'll connect you with others. If you want help finding a support group, I will try to connect you with a local support group as well. One last question, what kind of food do you carry? A lot, but I have some resources on my website, Diana, that can help you, but I'm also happy to share my personal list. Yeah, so thank you. You guys are great. Your comments mean so much to me. I feel very isolated these days working from home in New York City, and it's really great to connect with so many of you through the internet and your tweets. So thank you, and I hope you all stay safe. Have a great day, everyone.